I think it's probably too soon to tell and too soon to say. But obviously pretty gutted about the decision. We thought it was going to go our way.
A royal revelation has shaken the foundations of Buckingham Palace and stunned the entire world. After months of speculation and secrecy, King Charles has finally revealed Queen Elizabeth II's final will. And the truth is more explosive than anyone imagined. What was meant to be her last act of duty has instead become a source of heartbreak and outrage, with Prince Andrew, Harry, and Meghan reportedly in tears. Questions swirl. What did the Queen leave behind? And why did it tear her family apart? Today, we uncover the shocking truth. The Queen's final command. For years, hushed whispers echoed through Buckingham Palace and Windsor's shadowed corridors. Courtiers spoke of a secret, the Queen's hidden will. It was her final act of control, a carefully crafted testament from a monarch who ruled with quiet authority, unyielding duty, and unmatched restraint. When the document finally surfaced, sealed in crimson wax and marked with the royal coat of arms, time itself seemed to pause. Even the most composed royals felt a flicker of unease. This was more than parchment and ink. It was the Queen's last decree, the closing line of a reign that had defined an era. The Queen's will was read in complete privacy, away from cameras and ceremony, inside her cherished Windsor study. Sunlight danced on polished oak, family portraits watched silently, and the faint scent of lilies lingered. The room, once alive with her presence, now held a heavy, almost suffocating silence. At the head of the table sat King Charles III. His royal poise remained intact, but his eyes betrayed something more personal, grief mixed with the weight of duty. This was not a monarch presiding over an empire. This was a son preparing to hear his mother's final words. Beside him sat Princess Anne, her usual steel-like composure unshaken. She said nothing, her gaze fixed on the envelope that held their mother's last intentions. Across from her, Prince William sat stiffly, his hands clasped, his face expressionless. Though his mind swirled with questions he dared not voice. As the clock chimed softly, the door opened. Sir Edward Young, the Queen's most trusted private secretary, entered the room, followed by a senior solicitor from Ferrer & Co., the ancient firm that had managed royal affairs for generations. In his hands, Sir Edward carried the envelope everyone had been waiting for, thick, cream-colored, and sealed with the Queen's personal crest. When he placed it on the table, the silence was absolute. Every heartbeat seemed to echo. Then, with deliberate care, he broke the wax. The faint snap of the seal sounded louder than thunder. What followed was unlike any royal reading before. The will spoke not of wealth or jewels, not of palaces or possessions. It spoke of legacy, of the monarchy's survival, and of who would uphold it. Then came Section 7, the passage that would change everything. In clear, unflinching words, the Queen declared that Prince Andrew, Prince Harry, and Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, were to receive no further royal financial support, no estates, no access to family trusts, no royal privileges. Their children, too, were to be excluded from any titles or inheritance tied to the crown. The air in the room turned to stone. Charles's face drained of color. William stared at the table in disbelief. Even Anne's stoic calm flickered for a brief human moment. But the most chilling detail came last. Attached to the document was a short note, handwritten in the Queen's unmistakable script. A sealed envelope shall remain unopened unless this will is challenged. The solicitor explained that the envelope contained evidence, letters, recordings, and private communications the Queen had collected over the years. Proof, perhaps, of truths too dangerous to ever speak aloud. The message was unmistakable. Challenge the Queen's will, and the truth will speak for itself. In that moment, a heavy understanding fell over the room. This was not simply a legal document. It was a final act of strategy, a masterstroke from a woman who had ruled through storms and scandal alike. The Queen's will was final, leaving Prince Andrew, Prince Harry, and Meghan with nothing. But how would Prince Andrew react to such a final blow from his mother's hand? Would he quietly accept her decision, or dare to challenge the will? Now let's uncover how Prince Andrew faced his mother's final judgment, the fall of the Queen's favorite. For Prince Andrew, it was as though an entire lifetime of privilege, protection, and quiet entitlement vanished in a single breath. The man once known as the Queen's favorite son had spent decades believing that her affection would shield him from the storms of scandal. But when the words of her will echoed through Windsor's ancient halls, that comforting illusion shattered, cleanly, completely, and without mercy. Andrew's name wasn't simply missing from the pages, it was struck out, deliberately and decisively, as though the Queen herself had drawn a final line under his chapter in royal history. His access to royal funds was revoked, his ceremonial roles, titles, and privileges, once symbols of honor, were formally stripped away. There was no room for interpretation, no hidden message between the lines. The Queen's decision was clear. Her son, the Duke of York, was to have no further royal duties, no financial support, and no future tied to the institution she had spent her life protecting. It wasn't vindictive, it was final. As the solicitor read those words aloud, the air inside the room grew heavier. Andrew's face stiffened, but his composure faltered. His head dropped, shoulders slumped forward, and the faint tremor in his lips betrayed the weight of what he was hearing. For a man who had once moved through royal corridors with unshakable confidence, this was something far more devastating than public humiliation. It was maternal judgment written in ink. No protest escaped his mouth, no argument followed. There was simply silence, the kind of silence that only exists when the truth is too heavy to confront. For years, Andrew had believed that his mother's loyalty would remain unbreakable, that behind closed doors she would always defend him, her dear Andrew, the boy who once made her laugh the loudest. But even the Queen's legendary restraint had its limits. Her devotion to the monarchy, to the idea of duty before blood, had defined her entire reign. And now, in her final act, she had made the same choice once more: the crown over compassion. Later that evening, long after the meeting had ended and the castle's corridors had gone quiet, Andrew returned to Royal Lodge in Windsor Great Park, the estate he had called home for decades. Witnesses said he entered the courtyard alone. There, beneath the dim light of the setting sun, stood a bronze statue of his late mother, elegant, unyielding, and distant even in death. He stood before it for nearly an hour, motionless. The autumn wind rustled the leaves, carrying with it the faint echo of the Queen's voice from a lifetime ago. Some said they saw him whispering, soft, broken words, lost to the evening air. Others said he simply stared, frozen in disbelief, his mind replaying her final decree. Inside that stillness, Andrew seemed to realize what the world already suspected, that the Queen's love had never been blind. It had been steadfast, yes, but also bound by something greater, her duty to protect the throne at all costs. For Prince Andrew, this wasn't just a loss of privilege, it was the loss of identity, the quiet erasure of a man once born into power, now left to face a life defined by disgrace. And as the night settled over Windsor, one truth became painfully clear. This was not cruelty, it was the Queen's judgment, and it was the coldest goodbye of all. Andrew realized he had lost his place in the royal circle. But what caused his dramatic fall? Had the Queen never forgiven his past scandals? And how much did those controversies shape his fate? Now let's explore the untold story of Prince Andrew's royal collapse. The scandal that shattered a prince. Once hailed as Queen Elizabeth II's favorite son, Prince Andrew once stood at the heart of royal privilege, admired, trusted, and fiercely protected. But in just a few years, that golden image would collapse into one of the darkest scandals the monarchy had ever faced. It began with whispers, quiet at first, about the Duke of York's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, the American financier whose luxurious lifestyle hid a horrifying secret. At the time, Andrew brushed off the gossip as exaggeration, insisting he had cut all ties once Epstein's crimes became public. Yet the truth was far more complicated. Newly revealed documents later exposed that Andrew and Epstein were still in contact months after the prince publicly claimed their friendship had ended. Emails handed to a London court painted a different story, one in which the two men were still exchanging casual messages as late as February 2011. In one chillingly relaxed note, Andrew wrote, "Keep in close touch, and we'll play some more soon." For a royal who had long enjoyed his mother's quiet affection and the respect of the British people, the revelation struck like thunder. It suggested not distance, but loyalty. Loyalty to a man the world now knew as a predator. Then came the book that reignited the storm. Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir surfaced, filled with harrowing recollections and new claims. Within its pages, she alleged that Prince Andrew once viewed it as his birthright to sleep with her when she was only 17, a claim both explosive and alarming. Giuffre's story quickly spread across headlines around the world. Though Andrew's legal team fiercely denied her allegations, and the Duke himself maintained his innocence in every interview, the damage was already done. For the royal family, the scandal was more than a PR disaster. It was a wound that cut directly into the Crown's moral authority and into the Queen's heart. The image of her once charming, heroic son, the man who had served in the Royal Navy during the Falklands War and stood proudly beside her at royal events, was now clouded by disgrace. Behind the palace gates, courtiers whispered that the Queen was torn, a mother desperate to protect her son, yet a monarch bound by duty to protect the crown. And as if fate wanted to twist the knife further, another scandal soon followed. Reports surfaced that a close associate of Prince Andrew, a man once considered part of his inner circle, had been banned from the United Kingdom over allegations of being a Chinese spy. It added a new layer of suspicion and embarrassment, dragging Andrew's name deeper into a web of controversy. What had begun as a tale of friendship gone wrong had now become a saga of downfall, denial, and disgrace. The once proud Duke of York, known for his confidence and charm, had become a shadow of his former self. Once seen as the Queen's dependable son, he was now viewed as the royal family's greatest liability. A reminder that no title, no lineage, not even a mother's love, could shield one from the consequences of their choices. For Andrew, each new revelation was more than scandal. It was a relentless, public unraveling of the privileges he thought royal blood guaranteed, exposing him to scrutiny, shame, and the harsh reality that legacy offers no immunity. And for the monarchy, it was a painful lesson. Even within the walls of Buckingham Palace, the past never truly stays buried. Prince Andrew's string of scandals continues to haunt him, even after his mother's passing. But did he see his fall coming? And why did he choose to relinquish his royal title even before the Queen's will was read? Let's find out. The day the Duke of York ceased to exist, the news rippled through Britain like a cold wind over Windsor. Prince Andrew, once one of the most privileged men in the world, a son of a queen, a war veteran, a royal by birth, had agreed to surrender the title that had defined his entire life, the Duke of York. It wasn't just a name. It was identity, heritage, and centuries of history wrapped in velvet and gold. And now he was giving it up, not by choice, but by consequence. The announcement came quietly from Buckingham Palace, not with fanfare or ceremony, but through a carefully worded statement. Yet beneath its polished language, one could feel the tremor of humiliation. Prince Andrew has agreed to give up his use of the Duke of York title, the message read. He will also relinquish his honors as a Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order and Royal Knight Companion of the Most Noble Order of the Garter. That meant the end of formal prestige. The medals, the uniforms, the roles that once made him a visible figure at royal events. All that remained was the simple, inescapable truth. He was still Prince Andrew, but only by blood. That title alone could never be stripped away. He was, after all, born the son of a queen. Later that day, another statement was released, this time from Andrew himself. It was short, deliberate, and clearly written under the weight of immense pressure. In discussion with the king and my immediate and wider family, we have concluded the continued accusations about me distract from the work of His Majesty and the royal family, he said. I have decided, as I always have, to put my duty to my family and country first. His words tried to sound noble, loyal, and dutiful, but to many, they carried a quieter tone, resignation. 5 years earlier, Andrew had stepped back from public life after the scandal involving Jeffrey Epstein exploded worldwide. Since then, he had lived largely out of sight, a ghost within his own family. The once confident prince now walked alone on the grounds of Royal Lodge, far removed from the public duties he once relished. Now, This new announcement felt like the final curtain call. With His Majesty's agreement, he added, "We feel I must now go a step further. I will therefore no longer use my title or the honors which have been conferred upon me. As I have said previously, I vigorously deny the accusations against me." For those who had followed his journey, it was a moment soaked in irony. The man once called the Queen's favorite son had now been reduced to a name without a title, a prince in exile within his own palace walls. Royal insiders revealed that King Charles III acted with reluctant resolve. Burdened by decades of controversy, the monarchy could no longer tolerate the dark shadow cast by Andrew's scandals. With firm determination, the king chose to protect the crown above all else. And so, in a single sentence, centuries of royal tradition were broken. The Duke of York, a title once carried by warriors, nobles, and statesmen, was now silent. For Andrew, it was more than a formal step back. It was a quiet ending. A man stripped not just of his rank, but of the very identity that had once defined him. The crown had spoken, and for the first time, the Queen's favorite son truly stood alone. Andrew lost his royal title even before the will was read, reducing him to an ordinary man. But how would Harry and Meghan respond to this new development? Would they accept it or challenge it as direct heirs of the reigning king? Now let's dive into how Harry and Meghan faced the Queen's last decree. Montecito morning. Thousands of miles from Buckingham Palace in the quiet hills of Montecito, California, dawn broke gently over a sprawling 9-bedroom estate. The golden light filtered through olive trees and rose gardens, casting long shadows across manicured lawns. To outsiders, it looked like paradise, a royal couple's peaceful retreat far from the noise of the crown. But that morning, peace vanished. When the news of Queen Elizabeth II's will reached them, the air inside the Sussex home grew heavy. The couple who had once walked proudly down the steps of Windsor Castle now stood frozen, thousands of miles away, feeling the invisible weight of a kingdom they had left behind, and that had now, it seemed, left them too. Prince Harry sat at a long oak table, the sealed copy of the document trembling slightly in his hands. His face, once so open and expressive, was pale and drawn. He had expected little, but not this. The Queen's words, written in her careful, measured tone, were final. There would be no royal inheritance, no financial support, and no access to family trusts. The meaning sank in slowly, painfully. It wasn't just about money, it was about belonging. Across the room, Meghan Markle read the lines concerning their children, Archie and Lilibet. The Queen's will stated that no titles or privileges tied to the monarchy would pass to them. Meghan's hands shook slightly as she set the document down. Her eyes lingered on her daughter's photograph beside the window, a reminder of the royal world her children would now never fully enter. For Meghan, this wasn't about crowns or ceremonies. It was about identity, about being recognized as part of the family, not just a chapter closed in royal history. Advisors were called. Lawyers debated possible action. There was talk of challenging the will, of seeking clarification, of finding legal loopholes. But every conversation ended in the same uneasy silence, because of one haunting clause, the sealed envelope. Rumor had it that inside that envelope lay evidence the Queen had gathered herself: private letters, personal recordings, even old messages between Meghan and palace aides from the tense days of the Megxit crisis. No one outside the palace knew what was inside, but everyone who had heard whispers about it understood one thing: opening that envelope could bring devastation. That night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, Harry walked barefoot through the garden. The California air was cool, scented with roses and the sea breeze. In his hand, he still held the copy of his grandmother's will. As he looked up at the stars, her voice echoed softly in his mind. Her laughter, her calm tone, her favorite phrase, "Remember who you are, and stand tall." But now, those words felt distant, like a memory from another life. Sometime before dawn, he sat down at his desk and began to write. It wasn't a formal letter. It was personal. One son reaching out to his father. "Please," he wrote, "let's find a way forward." Days passed before an answer came. The envelope bore the royal crest, the handwriting firm and unmistakable. Inside was a short message from King Charles III. "My hands are tied," it read. This was her wish. 7 words. No comfort, no room for hope. As the sun rose over Montecito once more, the estate stood silent. Still grand, still golden, but somehow emptier. The will had done what time and distance never could. It had cut the final thread between the Sussexes and the House of Windsor. It became clear to Harry and Meghan that they would receive nothing from the Queen's remaining estate, and their children would be affected too. But why did the Queen make such a harsh decision? Was it because of their distance from the royal family or their choice to step back from royal duties? Let's uncover the full story. The Great Departure. The end didn't come overnight. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, stepping away from royal life was not a single decision, but a slow, painful unraveling. A quiet breaking of ties that had once seemed unbreakable. Behind the high walls of Buckingham Palace, the mood in early 2021 was tense but calm. Like the still air before a storm, courtiers whispered of change. Advisors drafted statements. Every word would matter, every line would be examined by millions around the world. Then, on February 18, 2021, the palace finally spoke. In a formal statement, delivered with the same poise and restraint the monarchy had perfected over centuries, the announcement was made. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have confirmed to Her Majesty the Queen that they will not be returning as working members of the royal family. The message was brief, barely a few sentences, but its meaning struck like thunder. For the first time, the Queen's grandson and his wife were officially closing the door on the institution that had defined generations of Windsors. Yet this was not a sudden decision. It was the culmination of years of growing tension, unspoken pain, and quiet rebellion. Just 1 year and 1 month earlier, the world had been stunned when Meghan and Harry revealed plans to carve out a progressive new role within this institution. They had hoped to balance royal duty with personal independence, to serve the crown, but on their own terms. To many, it sounded bold. To others, it sounded impossible. At first, there was optimism. Negotiations began between the Sussexes and palace officials. There were discussions of part-time royal work, of splitting time between Britain and North America, of keeping their royal patronages, while pursuing financial freedom. But as the talks dragged on, it became clear that their vision of modern royalty did not align with the monarchy's centuries-old traditions. Within palace corridors, senior aides worried about precedent. If the Sussexes were allowed such freedom, what would stop future royals from following the same path? For the Queen, a woman who had devoted her entire life to duty and service, compromise had its limits. And so, with heavy hearts and carefully chosen words, the final decision was made. In the same statement, the palace added, "The honorary military appointments and royal patronages held by the Duke and Duchess will be returned to Her Majesty." It was an unmistakable signal. The couple was not just stepping back, they were stepping away. For Harry, the loss of his military titles, including Captain General of the Royal Marines, was especially painful. He had served in Afghanistan, led soldiers into combat, and carried the pride of the armed forces in his heart. Now, that connection was gone. For Meghan, the change was both freeing and isolating. The palace she once entered as a new duchess, smiling, hopeful, and full of purpose, had become a symbol of restraint and misunderstanding. When the statement finally arrived in California, the couple reportedly read it side by side, enveloped in a heavy, hushed silence. No arguments, no outbursts, just the stark, undeniable awareness that this marked the irreversible point from which there could be no turning back. The monarchy had drawn its line, and the Sussexes had chosen their path. In that moment, the fairy tale of the modern royal couple ended, and a new chapter began. One built not on tradition or titles, but on independence, conviction, and the courage to walk away from the world's most powerful family. Harry and Meghan stepped away from Britain and their royal duties. But does that justify excluding them from the Queen's estate? And will King Charles strictly enforce her will or show leniency toward his son? Now, let's explore the King's burden, Charles and the weight of his mother's final will. For King Charles III, the moment of truth came not with a grand coronation or a royal ceremony, but in the quiet aftermath of his mother's passing. Among the velvet boxes, handwritten notes, and carefully sealed envelopes left behind by Queen Elizabeth II lay a document that would test him more than any crown ever could: her final will. To most, it was a simple matter of estate and inheritance. But to Charles, it was far more than that. It was his mother's last command, written not just with ink, but with the wisdom, fear, and foresight of a monarch who had spent 70 years guarding the stability of her family and her realm. Enforcing that will became the king's greatest trial. He was bound by duty, by the weight of centuries of royal law, and by the haunting mystery of a sealed envelope said to contain the Queen's most private instructions. That envelope, locked within the royal archives, carried an unspoken power, a reminder that even in death, the Queen's voice could not be silenced. Charles wanted peace. He wanted reconciliation. He had spent years watching the cracks form within his family, brothers divided, sons estranged, and loyalty stretched thin. Yet the Queen had been deliberate. She had planned her legacy down to the smallest detail, knowing full well the storm that would follow her departure. She had anticipated every clash, every moment of heartbreak, every sting of betrayal. With meticulous care, she encased her decisions in unbreakable legal walls, ensuring that not even a king could alter her final choices. Her foresight was absolute, her authority unchallenged, leaving no room for doubt or defiance. Those who saw Charles during those early days after her passing spoke of a man torn between two worlds, the dutiful monarch and the grieving son. He could be seen walking alone through the gardens of Windsor Castle, tracing the same paths his mother once loved. The ancient oaks whispered in the breeze, their branches heavy with memory. Sometimes he would pause by the long walk, where he and the Queen had often shared quiet moments in years past. She had always found peace there, away from cameras and protocol, just a mother and her son. Now, as he walked those same paths, the burden of her absence pressed down on him. The eyes of the world saw only the crown upon his head. Few noticed the sorrow behind his calm composure. He had inherited not only her throne, but her silence, the silence of restraint, of unspoken duty, of emotions buried beneath layers of royal tradition. Every decision he made would now be compared to hers, every word measured against the quiet wisdom she carried effortlessly for decades. And yet, in those moments of solitude, Charles often wondered if this was her final lesson to him: to rule with steadiness, not sentiment, to put duty before desire, to honor her wishes even when they conflicted with his heart. The truth was inescapable. The Queen's legacy extended far beyond a simple will. She had left a carefully crafted command, a final order designed to safeguard the monarchy's future, even if it meant tearing the family apart in the process. For Charles, it was both a gift and a curse. He would forever be the son who could not rewrite his mother's truth, the king who carried her voice in every decision and her silence in every breath. And in that silence, her power still lived on. Bound by duty and the weight of legacy, King Charles had no choice but to honor the Queen's final will. But what impact would it have on the monarchy? Now, let's uncover how one will shatter the royals' quiet order, the Queen's final shock. When news of the Queen's will finally broke, it spread across the globe like wildfire. Headlines screamed in disbelief: Prince Andrew written out, Harry and Meghan cut off completely. The Queen's final twist shocks the royals. Within minutes, television screens, newspapers, and social media exploded with speculation. Anchors spoke in hushed tones, royal experts debated endlessly, and crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, straining for even a whisper of truth. But inside the palace gates, the mood was nothing short of electric, tense, silent, and heavy with shock. The very air seemed to tremble with the weight of what had just been revealed. Phones rang without being answered. Private secretaries exchanged uneasy glances. Conversations stopped mid-sentence whenever footsteps echoed down the marble halls. Every word spoken felt dangerous, every question unwelcome. The Queen's will, her final command, had done what no outsider ever could. It had divided the family she had spent her life holding together. Prince Harry tried to call his father, but the line remained unanswered. Aides later said King Charles III was in meetings, but those close to the royal circle knew the truth. There were no words that could mend what the will had just broken. Prince William, usually the steady voice in family matters, avoided confrontation altogether. He kept his focus on royal duties, attending engagements with practiced smiles, while privately wrestling with his mother's decision and what it meant for the family's future. As for Prince Andrew, he remained inside Royal Lodge, the sprawling estate in Windsor he had once shared with quiet pride. Not a single photograph of him emerged in those days. Curtains were drawn. Visitors were turned away. It was as though the Duke of York, stripped of titles, stripped of trust, had vanished into silence. The Queen's final act had bound them all together, not through love or loyalty, but through a shared fear. And at the heart of it all was that sealed envelope. No one outside a tiny circle of royal advisors knew what it contained. Some believed it held letters written in the Queen's own hand, confronting private betrayals and hidden truths. Others whispered it contained evidence, were emails, messages, and confessions, the kind that could rewrite history if ever made public. Whatever the truth, the envelope had become legend, a silent threat that loomed over every royal gathering, a phantom presence in every conversation. The mere mention of it could turn the mood in a room cold. That evening, rain fell softly over Windsor, painting the castle walls with streaks of gray. The royal family appeared together at a public event, standing side by side in solemn unity. Cameras captured what seemed like composure, the image of a monarchy unshaken. But behind those calm faces, a different storm was raging. They weren't grieving only the Queen's passing. They mourned certainty itself, the steady guidance, the silent authority, the invisible thread that had held their fragile world together for decades. Without her, the family felt unmoored, exposed, and painfully vulnerable to a future unknown. The Queen had left them her crown, her legacy, and, most haunting of all, her silence. And that silence spoke louder than any royal decree. It drifted through every corridor of the palace, curling around marble statues and reverberating through centuries-old halls, colder than grief, keener than rage, and more unyielding than any law or royal decree. Its presence pressed on every soul who dared enter. It was her final command, not written in ink, but carved into the hearts of those she left behind. The world would remember her for her grace and her reign. Yet those she left behind would be haunted not by riches or titles, but by her silence, unyielding, eternal, and absolute, echoing through every corner of the royal legacy. So, what do you think about the Queen's will? Is stability or chaos ahead for the royal family? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.